Montana Territory, 1879. The wind carried dust and judgment in equal measure when Delia Ashford rode into the mining town of Barrow Creek, alone, with a bloody palm and a sheriff on her trail. The sun was just cresting the edge of the Bitterroot Range, gold lights spilling over the clapboard rooftops and rusted tin signs. Delia's mare limped, her coat flecked with sweat and lather. Delia held tight to the saddle horn, jaw clenched, jawline marked with road dust and fury. In her saddlebag, the silver brooch, the one they said she stole, clinked against the tin of salve she had not opened since yesterday. She had not stolen the brooch. It had been her mother's. But in Barrow Creek, truth did not matter much once a man with a badge pointed a finger. "That's her!" a voice shouted from across the street, and Delia's heart dropped. She barely had time to turn her head before the sheriff's deputy burst out of the general store, rifle in hand. She yanked the reins hard, but the mare gave out, stumbling onto her knees in the middle of the road. The rifle cocked. And that was when he stepped in. A man walked straight out of the livery stable like he had come from the shadows themselves. Tall, sun-brown, with a slow, steady walk that made the deputy hesitate a full beat too long. His hat tilted low, but Delia caught the flash of cold dark eyes and the steel set in his jaw. "You planning to shoot a woman on the ground, Reese?" he asked, voice calm and cutting. "She stole from the Prescott family up in Helena," Reese barked, lifting the rifle again. "They sent word. That brooch is worth near $200. The stranger's eyes flicked to Delia, to her bleeding hand, her torn gloves, the way her horse trembled. "She got a trial somewhere I do not know about?" he asked. "Or is Barrow Creek handing out nooses now without due process?" She ran. Then maybe someone gave her reason to. Delia stared at the man, unsure whether to speak or bolt. But her ankle throbbed twisted bad and the horse was useless. She had nowhere left to run. The deputy gritted his teeth, but finally lowered the rifle. "Fine. You want to play lawyer, Xavier Whitlow, you go right ahead. But if I find out she's lying, you will not," Xavier said, stepping forward. "I will take responsibility for her." Delia's mouth opened. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said, quiet. "Come on. Let us get you off the street." He helped her up like she weighed nothing, his hand warm around her arm. She swayed once, pain shooting through her leg, and his grip steadied her without a word. The town watched. Whispers rose like wind through wheat. They branded her a thief. But a cowboy had just stepped into the storm for her. Xavier's cabin sat a mile outside town, tucked between pine and rock just above the river bend. He let her sit on the porch while he tended the horse's leg, either of them speaking much. He moved with purpose, like a man used to fixing what was broken. When he came back up, he brought a tin of coffee and a bandage for her hand. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, voice low. He poured 2 cups, set one by her side. "Because I saw your face when Reese lifted that rifle. You looked like someone used to running. Not someone who steals." Delia looked down at her hands. "My mother's brooch," she said finally. "It was hers. I pawned it 2 days ago in Helena to buy medicine for a child. Prescott's boy. He was burning up. I worked for them 2 months. Cooked, cleaned, nursed that boy when his own mother would not go near him. Then I took the brooch back after his fever broke. He never even knew. And they called it theft. They came home early. Found the pawn stub. Said I meant to disappear with it. I did not even try to explain. I just ran." Xavier leaned against the porch rail, watching the trees shift in the wind. "You should have told them. They would not have listened." He nodded quiet, then looked at her. "You got folks anywhere?" "No," she said. "Just me." He held her eyes for a moment. "Well, you are not alone now." And something in her chest cracked open. By nightfall, she had a blanket near the hearth and a plate of beans and cornbread. Xavier moved around the cabin with ease, lighting the oil lamp, checking the lock on the door, stoking the fire. He did not speak much, but when he did, It felt like something solid, something you could lean on. She watched the firelight catch on his jaw as he sat across from her. "Why do you live out here alone?" she asked. He hesitated, then took a slow breath. "Used to ride with a cattle company down in Wyoming. Got tired of watching men fight over land that was never theirs to begin with. Came north. Built this place with my brother. He died 4 winters ago." Delia swallowed. "I am sorry. I am used to quiet," he said. "But sometimes it gets too quiet." She nodded, understanding more than she could say. They spent the next few days in a rhythm that settled deeper than she expected. She helped sweep, cooked when she could stand long enough, and fed the mare. Xavier went to town, asking questions about Prescott, about the boy, about the pawnshop. He came back one afternoon with a thin smile and a folded letter. "Got a statement from the pawnshop owner," he said. "He remembers you. Said you left a note with the brooch. Said you came back and paid full price, plus $2 for his trouble." Delia blinked. "He said that?" "Put it in writing. I will take it to the judge and Helena next week." She sat down hard on the porch step. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice trembling. "You do not even know me." Xavier crouched beside her. "I know what it means to be alone with no one on your side. I know what it means to be lied about. And I have seen the way you look after that horse, how you keep fixing things even when you are hurting." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, slow and careful. "And I know I have not wanted someone to stay in a long, long time. Until you." Delia felt her breath catch. And for the first time in weeks she let herself smile. They branded her a thief. But a cowboy found the truth. And he was not done fighting for her. 2 nights later, the first snow came early, brushing the ridge with pale powder and settling along the eaves of Xavier's cabin in a hush that made the world feel smaller. Delia stood near the window, arms wrapped in one of his old wool shirts, the sleeves rolled twice to fit her. She watched the flakes tap against the glass, slow and quiet. Behind her, the hearth crackled low, and the scent of pine smoke clung to her braid. She didn't speak until Xavier came through the door with a bundle of dry kindling under one arm and his coat dusted white. "You weren't gone long," she said, turning. "Just to the creek bend," he said, setting the wood near the stove. "Trapline caught a hare. I'll dress it in the morning." She nodded, fingers tracing the hem of the shirt absently. "Feels like winter's pushing in too soon." He glanced toward the window. "It always does up here. Never gives much warning." Delia hesitated, then let the silence stretch before speaking again. "I've never stayed anywhere long enough to see the seasons turn." Xavier looked up at that, his expression unreadable. "How long you think you'll stay here?" "I don't know," she said. "Depends what happens when you take that letter to Helena." He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, and pulled off his gloves. "You think you'll still be running after that?" "I've been running since I was 15, she said. "Hard to believe a letter could stop it. You ever think you might not have to run any more?" She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes didn't waver. "I try not to think that far ahead," she said. Xavier didn't press her. He only laid the gloves on the table, then picked up the kettle and poured hot water into 2 tin cups. The scent of steeped horehound drifted up, bitter and clean. "You ever hunt before?" he asked after a moment. She shook her head. "Only snared squirrels. I never had a real rifle that wasn't rusted through. There's a spare up in the loft. Barrel's short, but it's clean. If your ankle's strong enough, you could come with me tomorrow. I'll teach you." Delia tilted her head. "Why?" He handed her a cup. "Because you ought to know how." She took the cup, fingers brushing his. "You always do that? What's that? Give people things they never had the chance to ask for?" His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something softer. "Only when it matters." She didn't look away. The next morning came sharp and white. The frost clung to the cabin steps, and the air burned in her chest with every breath. Her ankle ached, but she wrapped it tight and didn't say a word. Xavier brought the rifle down from the loft and handed it to her without ceremony. You'll want to rest it high on your shoulder. Not low. Aim with your whole body, not just your hands. She followed him into the woods, stepping careful along frozen roots and damp leaves. They didn't speak much, just the rhythm of breath, the crunch of boots, the occasional call of a jay overhead. When they stopped, Xavier pointed to a log where a half-dozen tin cans had been lined up. I set these yesterday, he said. Didn't think you'd say yes, but figured you might. Delia lifted the rifle, jaw set. She missed the first two, but caught the third. Xavier didn't say a word, just reloaded and handed it back. By the time the last can spun into the leaves, her shoulder throbbed and her palms stung, but she grinned despite it. You'll want gloves next time, he said, nodding at the red marks. She looked over at him. There's going to be a next time? He didn't answer right away. Then, if you want there to be. They walked back slower, the rifle slung over her back, the cold biting less now that the sun had climbed over the trees. That night, she fell asleep near the fire, the rifle leaned against the wall beside her like it belonged there. When she woke past midnight, the flames had burned low, and Xavier was still awake, sitting in the rocker near the door, watching the embers. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Can't sleep? I don't sleep much when snow starts falling, he said. Too many memories get loud. She didn't ask which ones. He didn't offer. She stood, crossed the room, and sat beside him on the floor with her back against the wall. He didn't move, just reached down and brushed her knuckles once with the back of his hand. I don't need quiet anymore, she said, barely above a whisper. I just need someone who stays. He didn't say a word, but his hand found hers and held it, warm and steady. And she didn't let go. The trail to Helena was rimmed in frost and lined with pine that creaked under the weight of old snow. They left just after dawn, the sky still bruised with stars and the air bitter enough to sting the skin. Xavier rode ahead, his coat collar turned up, the letter from the pawnshop tucked safe in his coat pocket. Delia followed, wrapped in a wool shawl she'd stitched tighter 2 nights back, her mare walking steadier now, though slow. They didn't speak much on the ride. The sound of hooves on hard ground, the wind threading through the trees, that was enough. By the time they reached the edge of the valley, the sun had burned through the cold, casting long golden lines across the frozen fields. Helena sat quiet under a low sky, its brick and timber buildings softened by the morning light. Smoke curled from chimneys, and voices carried faintly from the boardwalks. Delia kept her head down as they entered town, hat brim low, her hands wrapped tight around the reins. You sure you want to come in with me? Xavier asked, pulling his horse to a stop outside the courthouse. I'm not hiding, she said, sliding down. Not anymore. Inside, the courthouse smelled of ink and old pinewood. The judge, a man with thinning gray hair and a starched collar that didn't quite fit, took the letter in silence. He read it once, then again, the paper crinkling between his fingers. Delia stood with her hands folded, refusing to shift even as her knees began to ache. When he finally looked up, his eyes held no apology, but his voice was clear. This clears you. Delia didn't move. Xavier glanced her way but said nothing. The judge set the letter down. I'll have it entered officially. Your name won't carry this. Not here. Delia nodded once, then turned and walked out. Xavier caught up with her on the steps. You did what they wouldn't, she said. You did it, he said. I only carried the letter. They rode out before noon, the wind sharper now, but the weight that had settled on Delia's shoulders since Helena first seemed to lift with each mile they put between them and the courthouse. That night they camped near the river bend, where the cottonwoods leaned low and the fire cracked soft in the damp air. Delia sat across from Xavier, her legs stretched toward the flames, her eyes steady. I never learned to trust quiet, she said. He set another log on the fire, watching it catch. Why not? Because it never lasted. It always meant something worse was coming. He looked over at her, and she met his gaze without flinching. "I want to believe it's different now," she said. "But I don't know how." "You don't have to know how," he said. "You just have to let it come." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of fabric, her mother's handkerchief, worn thin at the corners. "I thought I'd lost this when I left Helena the first time." Xavier leaned forward. "Where'd you find it?" "Tucked in my saddle lining," she said. "I'd sewn it in before I ever got to the Prescotts. I must have forgotten." He didn't touch it, but his eyes lingered on the faded stitching. "She used to keep lavender in it," Delia said, "to make her hands smell like something better than soap and lye." Xavier's voice dropped low. "She'd be proud of what you did." Delia looked down at the cloth. "Maybe. You carried something good through all of it," he said. "You didn't let it rot out of you." She folded the handkerchief slowly and set it back inside her coat. "I don't want to keep running. I don't want to be alone anymore." "You're not." She looked up. He shifted, the firelight catching the planes of his face. "You're not alone, Delia." She didn't look away, didn't speak. But after a moment, she reached across the space between them and laid her hand on his. And he held it like he meant to from the start. The following week settled in with a steady rhythm, smoke curling from the chimney at first light, frost melting from the fence rails by noon, and the soft slap of laundry on the line by afternoon. Delia no longer counted the days since she'd run. The weight of flight had thinned, replaced by something quieter routine, worn boots beside the hearth, the sound of Xavier's footsteps returning from the woods just before dusk. One morning, she found him kneeling in the shed, sharpening his axe with the kind of focus that left no room for words. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You ever think about building something bigger?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Bigger? A house with more than one room. A place that doesn't feel like it's always bracing for winter." He paused, thumb checking the blade's edge. "I thought about it after my brother passed. Drew up plans once, but I never laid the foundation." Delia stepped inside, the floor creaking under her boots. "What stopped you?" He set the axe down and stood, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't seem like there was a reason to." She met his gaze steady. "You have one now." The light in the shed shifted as the wind pushed against the walls. Xavier didn't speak, but he walked past her to the doorway, looking out toward the field where the river bent around the cottonwoods. "If we clear the lower slope come spring," he said, "there's space enough for a proper frame. Maybe 2 rooms if we stretch it." Delia stepped beside him. 3. He glanced at her, one brow raised. "One for work. Sewing, writing." "I want a table by a window," she said. "And I want to grow something that doesn't come out of a root cellar." His mouth softened into something quiet. "Then we'll need good glass. The kind that doesn't frost over every time the wind shifts." They stood there a while longer, the cold pressing in through the open door, but neither moved to close it. Later that day, she found a stack of cut lumber near the toolshed, rough-hewn, bark still clinging. He didn't mention it, and she didn't ask. That evening, she brought down her mother's sewing tin from the loft and set it on the table without explanation. The lid was dented, the hinges loose, but the thimble inside gleamed like it still remembered her mother's hands. Xavier glanced at it once, then back to his ledger. "You planning repairs?" She sat and threaded a needle. "Planning curtains." He chuckled low, the sound rumbling like distant thunder. "You're skipping steps." "I'm starting where it matters." She worked while he tallied the harvest stores, the fire popping softly beside them. When she looked up, he was watching her hands. "You handle a needle like a weapon," he said. "I learned early not to waste motion." He nodded once. "You want me to help frame that new room when Melt comes?" Delia didn't answer immediately. She rethreaded the needle and tied off a knot at the hem. "I want you to live in it with me," she said. Xavier didn't move, didn't blink. Then he closed the ledger and pushed it aside. "You sure?" he asked. "I've had enough of being unsure," she said. I've had enough of waiting for someone to give me permission to stop running. He reached across the table and took her hand, callous fingers curling around hers with a gentleness that felt earned. I'll build it strong, he said. We'll build it, she corrected. Outside, the snow began to fall again, light, slow, unhurried. And inside, two people who had carried too much for too long began to build something that could hold them both. The thaw came slow that year, the ground releasing winter inch by inch instead of all at once. March opened with gray skies and a sullen wind, but each day brought a little more softness to the earth. Beneath the cabin's eaves, icicles dripped steady as a clock, and the river, once locked in silence, began to murmur again. Delia kneeled in the soil behind the woodshed, sleeves rolled, her hands damp with the first good dirt of spring. She dug in quiet focus, her fingers parting the earth into rows. Xavier had carried down a sack of seed potatoes from the loft and handed them to her without a word that morning. Now they rested beside her in a worn wooden pail, eyes sprouting pale shoots. Xavier leaned against the fence he'd reinforced a week prior, his arms folded. You always plant by hand? I trust my hands more than I trust a tool for this, she said. If you've got something living that needs tending, best to feel the shape of it yourself. He stepped closer, watching her press a wedge of potato into the furrow. You ever grow anything up from seed? Once. She placed the next piece and brushed soil over it. It didn't take. Too dry. Well, he said, crouching beside her, this land holds water better than most. We'll give it a fair chance. She looked over at him, eyes catching his. Have you grown something? He tilted his head. A few things. None of them stuck. Delia smiled, but didn't press. She moved to the next row, and he followed, passing her the pail when she reached for it. Later they sat on the porch, boots muddy, hands stained. She leaned her shoulder against his, quiet. He didn't speak, just rested his cheek against the top of her head and let the stillness settle. That night she brought the ledger down from the shelf where he tucked it away after winter and opened it on the table. The pages were neat but practical, with no wasted lines. She tapped the corner with her finger. We'll need nails. 2 full crates, not half. And that saw blades dulled through. He looked over her shoulder. I've got a cousin out in Deer Lodge. He trades in tools. I can ride out next week. Delia turned a page. We'll need oil for the hinges, too. And a square if we're laying beams straight. Xavier set down his coffee tin. You're not just building the house in your head, are you? I'm building all of it, she said. I'm staying. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I wasn't sure if I'd ever hear that out loud. You didn't need to, she said. You knew. The following week, she stood in the doorway as he saddled his horse. The sun sat low, but the sky was clear, and the road to Deer Lodge had dried enough to ride. 3 days there and back, he said, tightening the cinch. For if I stop to load supplies, I'll have the rest of the plot staked by then, she said. And the curtain fabric cut. He stepped to her, his hand brushing her cheek. You sure you'll be all right alone? I've been alone before, she said. But I'm not now. He kissed her, slow and certain, and left just as the first geese passed overhead in formation. While he was gone, the field dried under her boots. She marked the corners of the foundation with twine and stakes, her lines measured, each corner trued against the next. At night, she kept the fire low and read by lamplight, her mother's thimble resting beside her on the table. On the 3rd day, just after sundown, she heard hoofbeats on the ridge. When Xavier rode into view, the cart behind him rattling with crates, she didn't wait on the porch. She met him halfway down the path, arms sliding around his waist before he'd even dismounted. You get what you needed? She asked, voice against his coat. Everything, he said. And 3 extra hinges, because I've learned to prepare. She leaned back to look at him. You learn fast. We both had reason to, he said. They didn't break ground until the 2nd week of April. The days lengthened, and the sun came down warmer with each one. Delia worked beside him every hour, hauling timber, measuring beams, hammering joists into place with a rhythm that matched his. They argued once over the placement of the hearth, but it ended with his arms around her waist and her laughing into his shoulder, breathless and flushed from the climb up the frame. When the roof went on, they stood in the doorway, watching the light filter through the open rafters. The house was still bones and beams, but it stood solid. "You've done good work," Xavier said. "So have you," she replied. "I was talking about the curtains," he teased. She nudged him with her hip. "Those aren't hung yet. They will be." By midsummer, the house was finished. Wood polished, windows glazed, the soil behind the shed thick with green. The potatoes had taken, and the first stalks of corn stood shoulder high. Delia moved through the kitchen with ease, her steps practiced, her eyes steady. Xavier built a table by the front window, just as she'd asked, and she filled the sill with jars of herbs and drying mint. One evening, as they sat on the porch, her fingers laced through his, he looked out at the horizon and said, "This land's old. It remembers things. You can feel it in the wind sometimes." She nodded, resting her head against his arm. "So do I. But I've decided to remember the right things now." He turned to her. "Like what?" "Like how it feels to be chosen. Not as a favor, but because someone saw me and stayed." He didn't answer right away. Then he pulled a small box from his coat pocket, the wood worn smooth, the latch handmade. "I traded for this in Deer Lodge," he said. Inside, nestled in a piece of muslin, was a ring carved from antler, the band polished with oil, set with a small, round turquoise. No gold. No silver. But it was honest. And it was beautiful. Delia stared at it for a long moment. "You made this?" "I shaped it. The man I stayed with helped finish it." She took it from the box and slid it on her finger. It fit. "I didn't think I'd ever wear something like this," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd ever give one," he replied. She turned to him fully. "Then we've both been wrong in the best ways." He kissed her there, under the sky turning lavender, the land soft with summer heat, and the scent of pine heavy in the air. They stayed on the porch long after the sun set, hands linked, the house behind them warm and whole. Years passed. The fields grew rich with vegetables and flowers. Delia taught 2 neighbor girls how to stitch hemlines straight, and Xavier traded wood frames in town, his name known for work that held true through wind and time. The house never shifted in its foundation. The hearth always burned steady. And every morning, without fail, Xavier poured her coffee in the tin cup she favored, the one with the dent along the rim, and said, "You ready to begin again?" And every morning she said, "I already did." They never stopped choosing each other. Not once.